Sometimes it's not the person who returns first. It's the weather, the smell, the air tightening before a storm. A steady drizzle tapped against the glass of a downtown Chicago coffee shop as Lila Mercer sat in the corner seat, nursing the warmth of a half-finished latte. The place was half full, all quiet chatter and low music, the kind of space that made thinking too easy. Outside, the sky was the color of wet ash. Late October always had a way of feeling like goodbye. She traced her fingers slowly around the rim of her cup, eyes watching the gray sidewalk beyond the window. Her mind, though, wasn't here. Not really. It drifted back, as it often did, to a stretch of days she thought she'd outgrown. 2 years ago, this time of year, she was alone in a hospital room, 28 weeks pregnant. No messages, no flowers, just the distant hum of machines and the cold imprint of his absence. She remembered holding her belly with one hand and her phone with the other, hoping, stupidly, that he'd call. That he'd say he'd made a mistake, that he hadn't meant to disappear. But he never did. Back in the present, the barista called out an order. Lila blinked, pulling herself upright. She adjusted her scarf, more out of habit than need. Her architecture firm, Mercer Studio, was just around the block. A client meeting in an hour. Deadlines. Deliverables. Life had moved on, at least outwardly. She reached for her phone to check the time, but paused halfway. Her hand hovered in midair, uncertain, like it had done so many times before when she wanted to reach out to him. She didn't. Instead, she glanced back at the window. The rain had started to blur the city, soft streaks across glass, muting the edges of everything. Across the street, an office building bore her name in etched steel. Mercer Studio. Clean lines, matte black, and brushed brass, everything she'd built after he left, everything he never believed she'd finish on her own. And now he worked for them. She didn't see him yet, but she felt the shift in the air, like when you hear thunder before the flash. He was nearby. He didn't know she was here. But the city did, and for a brief moment, she watched her own reflection in the cafe window, calm, composed, yet quietly bracing, like someone waiting for an old song to play again, already knowing how it ends. The rain kept falling, gently, relentlessly, like memory. Some people enter a room the same way they left your life, without warning, without apology. The door swung open with a low chime, the kind meant to feel quaint, but always a little too loud in quiet places. Lila didn't look up right away. She was still stirring what remained of her latte, pretending to be absorbed in the swirls of milk and cinnamon. But she felt it before she saw it. A shift in the air pressure, the sudden stillness behind her. The unmistakable sensation of someone scanning the room, looking for a face they weren't sure they wanted to find. And then, his voice. "Lila?" She looked up. There he was, Noah Granger. Same sharp jawline, same easy confidence in the way he stood, holding an umbrella still dripping with October rain. He wasn't soaked. He never had been the type to get caught in things. Even the weather seemed to pause for him. He hadn't changed much. If anything, he had only grown more into the version of himself he'd always wanted to become. Trim gray suit, polished shoes, watch that caught the light just enough. But Lila didn't move. She just blinked once, calmly, then gestured to the empty seat across from her. He took it, without asking, of course. That was always his way. Coming in, taking space, assuming the seat was still his. "How have you been?" he asked, carefully casual. She kept her voice even. "Fine, working a lot." He nodded, drumming his fingers lightly on the edge of the table. That little rhythm used to drive her mad during late nights when he couldn't sleep, and wouldn't let her either. "I didn't know you were still in Chicago," he said. "Still?" she echoed. There was something about that word, like she hadn't moved on, just stayed. Like her whole world had stayed paused while his kept moving. She said nothing more. He glanced around, like maybe seeing the space might give him some footing. But Lila didn't offer anything. No questions. No openings. Finally, he leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Listen, I know I messed up back then." The words didn't hit as hard as they might have once. They landed softly, like pebbles on water, no splash, just small ripples. Lila inhaled slowly. She remembered the night he left, when he said he couldn't handle the weight, as if their child had been a burden, not a life. As if her heartbreak had been an inconvenience. She didn't respond, not out of spite, just nothing needed to be said. The silence hung, full of all the things they didn't dare unpack in public. Then, from outside, a single yellow leaf pressed itself against the window, caught in the rain. It stuck there for a moment, delicate and almost beautiful, until it slid down, slow and certain, forgotten. Some silences aren't broken by words, just the right presence. Lila barely had time to gather her thoughts before the bell above the cafe door rang again, a softer sound this time, like it had learned not to interrupt. She turned instinctively. Mason Liu stepped inside, tall and composed, brushing a few raindrops from his navy overcoat. He moved with the quiet assurance of someone used to attention, but never demanding it. His eyes scanned the room once before settling on her, and the faint smile that touched his lips reached all the way to his eyes. Noah followed her gaze. Lila didn't have to say anything. The subtle shift in her posture, the ease in her shoulders, it told its own story. Mason approached, pausing only long enough to nod politely at Noah before leaning down to press a gentle kiss to Lila's temple. It wasn't performative. It wasn't for show. It was how he always greeted her. "Sorry I'm late," Mason said, his voice calm and low. The meeting ran longer than I expected. Lila looked up at him, her expression softening as if she'd only just started to exhale. Noah cleared his throat, straightening in his seat. "So, this is?" Lila nodded slowly. "Noah, this is Mason Liu, my partner. Mason LaGranger." Mason extended a hand. Noah hesitated a split second too long before taking it. "Nice to meet you," Mason said simply. The shake was brief, polite, but something unspoken passed between them. An assessment, maybe. A quiet reckoning. Noah's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Likewise. Lila felt the tension settle like a fog around the table. She glanced at the empty saucer in front of her, suddenly aware of how quiet everything had gone. "I should get going," Noah said abruptly, rising with the kind of practiced charm he used when he didn't want to linger. "Good seeing you, Lila." She didn't rise. "Take care," she said. He left without looking back. The door swung shut behind him with a dull thud, sealing the quiet again. Mason sat across from her, reaching across the table to gently cover her hand with his. His touch was steady, unshaken by the encounter. "You okay?" he asked. Lila gave a small nod. "Yeah, just surprised, I guess." But underneath the surprise was something older, something quieter, a reminder of how once she had sat across from Noah and believed it would last. Now she sat across from someone who simply stayed. Outside, the leaf that had slid down the window earlier was gone, washed away in the rain. Some days you clean out a drawer and end up reopening a whole chapter. 2 days later, a thin slice of morning sun cut across the hardwood floor of Lila's apartment, settling on a half-open closet door. She hadn't meant to reach for that shelf, was only looking for a spare sketchbook. But her fingers found a familiar box instead. Cardboard, faded at the corners, taped shut like something you don't plan on revisiting. She carried it to the coffee table anyway. Inside, photo prints, notes in her handwriting, hospital bracelets, echoes of another life. She sat back slowly, holding a picture at the top of the pile. College, fall leaves. Her in a chunky scarf, smiling, and Noah beside her, grinning like the world had already bent in his favor. They looked young, naive in a way only the deeply hopeful can be. A notification buzzed on her phone. It was from Claire, her best friend since undergrad. The message was short. "Did you hear? Noah's company is merging with Mercer Studio. Looks like he's joining the Chicago office. Full-time." Lila stared at the screen. A dull throb began in her chest. Not pain exactly. Not anymore. Just the slow tightening that came from knowing the past wasn't finished with her. Even if she'd tried to be finished with it. She put the phone down, turned the photo over. There, in her own looping cursive, "Us," before anything broke. She closed the box gently and slid it back beneath the coffee table, not ready to throw it away, but no longer needing it nearby. From the kitchen, the kettle began to whistle. She moved toward it in silence, her slippers soft against the floor. The windows had fogged slightly from the change in weather. Outside, the city stretched as usual, unmoved, indifferent. But on her living room wall, a single ray of sunlight hit the framed blueprint of the very first office she ever designed, Mercer Studio, Floor 1. A name she'd chosen when she had no one left to carry it with her. And now? He would see it every morning he clocked in. And she wouldn't need to say a word. Sometimes, comfort doesn't come with answers, just with presence. The afternoon light filtered through the wide windows of Lila's studio, warming the edges of blueprints scattered across her desk. A pencil rolled gently toward her elbow, nudged by a careless gesture she hadn't noticed making. She'd been staring at the same rendering for 10 minutes, not seeing it. Her phone vibrated. One message. Mason, dinner tonight? Or I can swing by the studio and we grab drinks after. No flourish, no pressure, just an offer. She smiled before she realized she had. Her thumbs moved across the screen, typing back. Dinner sounds perfect. I'll wrap up here by 6. She set the phone down, leaned back, and looked up at the ceiling as if the silence might offer her something. It didn't. Only the soft hum of the space around her. The scratch of pencil on paper from the intern across the room, the low whir of the printer, the faint scent of eucalyptus from the studio diffuser she'd forgotten was even on. She was building again. Not just buildings, but something steadier. Days with a rhythm, mornings without dread. But every so often, a shadow passed. Noah's return had stirred up something quieter than rage and duller than heartbreak. Regret, maybe. Not because she wanted him back, but because she could still remember who she was when she loved him. Young, uncertain, believing that love alone would be enough. Now she knew better. Her eyes fell to a framed sketch on the shelf. Her first commissioned lobby space, clean lines and curved walls drawn in the early months of her pregnancy. She had poured herself into it while trying not to drown. She'd signed that contract in silence, her belly barely visible beneath the coat she wore even indoors. Noah never saw it, never asked. And yet now, he'd walk past that sketch every day on his way to someone else's office. She reached for her mug, took a sip of tea gone lukewarm. Across the studio, the afternoon sun hit the glass plaque by the front entrance, etched with the name Mercer Studio in soft gold serif. Outside, the sky had begun to shift, a pale blue giving way to the first threads of dusk. No storm this time. Just the quiet kind of change that arrives without warning and stays. That evening, the soft chime above the door of a small Italian bistro rang as Lila stepped inside. Mason was already there, at a corner table by the window, a bottle of red uncorked, 2 glasses half full, one waiting for her. He stood as she approached, smiling like she'd been gone longer than a day. "You made it," he said, pulling out her chair. She nodded, slipping off her coat. "Of course I did." The bistro was warm, softly lit. A violin played somewhere in the background, not too loud, not trying to be noticed. Lila looked around, quietly absorbing the ordinary beauty of the space. Candlelight flickering in cut glass holders, the quiet clink of silverware, the distant clatter from the kitchen. It was the kind of setting you could feel safe in. They toasted lightly. "To you," Mason said, "to Mercer Studio." Lila's smile grew shy around the edges. She'd signed another major contract that morning, an adaptive reuse project that could reshape the firm's profile entirely. She hadn't planned to celebrate, but somehow he always remembered the moments that mattered. As they ate, conversation came easy. Mason told her about an upcoming client dinner in New York. She talked about new design concepts, about light wells and curved transitions, her hands gesturing softly as she spoke. He listened the way he always did, without interruption, without letting the silence fill with anything but space for her to keep going. Halfway through the meal, he reached across the table and took her hand. "I've been thinking," he said, voice low. "I'd like you to meet a few people from my circle. There's a foundation dinner next weekend. No pressure. Just, I want them to know you." The gesture didn't startle her, but it did land somewhere deep. There was no ring, no speech, no declarations. Just a folding open of the life he lived. A place at the table he'd saved for her. She looked down at his hand over hers, warm, steady. And she remembered. Years ago, on another night like this, Noah had taken her out to celebrate her small studio opening. They sat at a cheap ramen bar. He spent most of dinner scrolling through his phone, pausing only to say she shouldn't get her hopes up too much. That memory came and went quickly, like passing a window with the lights off. Now, across the table, Mason waited, not for a performance, but an answer. Not because he needed her to say yes, but because he hoped she'd want to. Lila nodded slowly. "I'd like that." Mason's smile reached the corners of his eyes. They finished their meal in quiet rhythm, dessert shared between them. A dark chocolate torte she swore she wouldn't finish, but somehow did. Outside, the night had deepened, the street lamps casting soft halos onto wet pavement. As they left, Mason took her hand again, weaving his fingers through hers like it was second nature. And for the first time in a long while, Lila didn't feel like she was catching up to her life. She felt like she was already inside it. Behind them, the empty wine glasses still caught the candlelight. Soft, red, and steady. Sometimes, peace doesn't arrive with fanfare. It just sits beside you in the quiet. The car moved smoothly down Lakeshore Drive, headlights trailing reflections along the rain-glossed pavement. Inside, the cabin was quiet. Warm. Lila leaned gently against Mason's shoulder, her eyes half-lidded, fingers loosely interlaced with his. He didn't speak, just let her rest there, his arm a steady presence behind her. They'd left the restaurant without hurry. No need to fill the silence. No need to explain the calm between them. There was something rare in that stillness, something she'd once mistaken for dullness in the past, before she learned what stability actually felt like. Outside, the city blurred past, a steady hum of streetlights, shadowed trees, the occasional flash of a bicycle in motion. Lila exhaled. Her mind drifted, not toward the evening, not toward the wine or the conversation, but toward the version of herself who used to fill silence with questions. The girl who measured love in how tightly someone held on when things got hard. Who mistook apologies for change, attention for care. Noah had once driven her home from a late dinner during her second trimester. She remembered the traffic lights glowing on his face as he told her he couldn't picture himself doing this whole family thing. His hand never left the steering wheel. He dropped her off without walking her in. She had sat on the edge of her bed that night, coat still on, one hand over her belly, wondering if she'd already lost something that wasn't even born yet. The car now turned quietly onto her street. Mason gave her hand a soft squeeze. "We're here," he said, almost in a whisper. She sat up slowly, stretching a little. "Thanks for driving," she murmured. "Always," he said, opening his door and stepping out first. He rounded the car to open hers, a small gesture, but one he did every time, without thinking. She smiled at that, at the consistency of him. He walked her up the short steps to her building. Neither of them rushed. The rain had thinned to a drizzle, and the air smelled faintly of wet leaves and cooling concrete. At the door, she turned to him. "I'll call you tomorrow?" she said softly. Mason nodded, brushing a strand of damp hair from her forehead. "I'll be around." He kissed her gently. No urgency, just presence. Then he turned and walked back toward the car, his silhouette fading into the misty streetlight. Lila stepped inside, closed the door, and leaned against it for a moment. The hallway was dark except for a faint glow from the kitchen. She slipped off her shoes, padded quietly to the window, and watched Mason's taillights disappear down the block. In their place, a soft reflection of her own face hovered on the glass, steady now. No longer searching, no longer shrinking, just home. Not all letters are meant to be opened. Some are better left untouched. The knock was soft, almost uncertain. Lila opened the door to find a courier standing beneath an umbrella, envelope in hand, rain slipping down the fabric in silver lines. Delivery for Lila Mercer. She signed without speaking, thanked him with a quiet nod, and closed the door. The envelope was heavy, cream-colored, the kind that tried too hard to feel important. Her name was written in thick calligraphy, no return address. But she knew. She carried it to the kitchen counter and set it down like it might break something. For a long moment, she didn't touch it again, just stood there, tea cooling in her hand. Eventually, she opened it. Inside, an invitation. Formal, lavish. "Noah Granger and Elaine Worthington request the pleasure of your company." The words blurred to engagement party, downtown venue, black tie. Her fingers tightened around the cardstock. The paper didn't flinch. She reread the names, his and hers, pressed in gold foil, shining like they had something to prove. For a second, her mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a mistake. A mass mailing. Maybe his fiancée didn't know. Or maybe she knew exactly. Lila folded the invitation back into the envelope, slid it under a stack of unopened mail on the side table. But its weight stayed in the room. She walked to the window and watched the rain deepen into a steadier rhythm. Her reflection blurred behind it, a ghost on the other side of the glass. Noah had once told her she was too emotional, said it like a diagnosis, not a feeling, said she made everything about herself. And now he was marrying into one of the oldest families in the city, a law firm heiress, a political dynasty. The kind of match people called perfect because it photographed well. Lila closed her eyes. She didn't feel jealous, not exactly. Just tired. Of ghosts. Of games. Of letters that pretended to be polite while slicing at old scars. She didn't know yet if she'd go. But as the rain traced quiet patterns down the glass, she imagined showing up, not for him, not for her, but for the version of herself who once begged him to stay, a woman who didn't know she'd be fine without him. The envelope still sat on the counter, its gold edges catching the kitchen light. Beautiful, unwanted. Sometimes strength isn't loud. It's in the way you stand still and don't look away. Lila stood in front of the tall mirror in Mason's bedroom, the city lights filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows behind her. She smoothed the fabric of the emerald dress, fingers trailing over the curve of her waist as if seeing herself in a new shape. She didn't usually wear this color. Too bold, too certain. But tonight, she needed it. Behind her, Mason adjusted his cufflinks in the reflection. His tuxedo jacket hung perfectly across his shoulders, his movements practiced but never performative. He looked over at her. "You're stunning," he said simply. Lila gave a soft smile, eyes still on the mirror. "It's just a dress." "No," he replied, stepping closer, resting a hand at the small of her back. "It's how you wear it." She met his gaze in the glass, and for a moment the noise of the night ahead faded. She wasn't sure if it was courage or just the absence of fear, but it felt like progress. They took the elevator down together, their reflections flickering briefly in the polished chrome walls. At street level, a car waited. The driver opened the door, and Mason held her hand as she stepped in, the weight of the gown gathering softly around her legs. The ride was quiet. The venue glowed ahead, a ballroom strung with light, its entrance flanked by guests stepping out of black cars and into the kind of evening that didn't forgive uncertainty. Paparazzi hovered at the curb. Flashbulbs sparked like distant lightning. As they exited, Lila's breath caught for a moment, not from nerves but from memory. The last time she'd worn something this formal, it had been a charity gala years ago. With Noah. She remembered feeling invisible then, even with her hand in his. Now, as she stepped forward with Mason beside her, she felt seen, even before anyone turned to look. Inside, chandeliers glinted like held breath, and music drifted above the soft murmur of wealth and conversation. Mason guided her toward a quiet corner before the room swallowed them completely. "Ready?" he asked. Lila nodded. "Let's find out." As they entered the main space, a woman she didn't recognize whispered something to her partner while glancing at Lila. Someone else smiled too widely. Somewhere across the room, Noah would be standing with his new circle, unaware she had already arrived. She adjusted the strap of her dress, shoulders back, chin lifted, not in defiance but in calm. The version of her who once would have shrunk in this room wasn't here anymore, only the one who stayed. Far above, crystal prisms turned slowly from the airflow, scattering soft light across her skin like borrowed stars. Some conversations don't ask to happen. They just find you anyway. Lila moved through the ballroom with practiced ease, a flute of champagne in hand, Mason just behind her. The music shifted into something jazzy and forgettable, a background hum against the low thrum of conversations and clinking glasses. She paused near an exhibit display. Framed photographs of community projects, part of the evening's philanthropic cause. One image showed a new school being built overseas, sunlight catching the curve of a child's smile. She let herself breathe there, eyes resting on the moment someone else had captured. Until? Lila Mercer? The voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like something more personal than public. She turned. A man in his late 30s, clean-cut, tailored suit, wine glass in hand. The kind of face you recognize just enough to feel uneasy about. "David Russell," he said before she had to ask. "We met years ago. I used to work with Noah on some property ventures." "Of course," she gave a polite nod. "Right, yes, it's been a while." David smiled a little too knowingly. "Didn't expect to see you here tonight." Word was, Noah's camp wasn't thrilled about the guest list. Her fingers tightened slightly around the glass. She kept her tone even. "I wasn't invited by him." "Ah." He took a sip. Still, bold move. She didn't answer. There was a pause, the kind that lets discomfort settle in before either side decides to break it. David leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "He's been talking about you, you know. Not directly, but The way people talk when they're trying not to sound bitter. Lila raised an eyebrow. Is that so? He chuckled. Look, I'm not here to stir anything up. Just figured you should know. Some men don't take well to being replaced. There it was, the smile, the suggestion, the subtle dance of past and present colliding. She gave a single nod. Not of agreement, just acknowledgement. I'm here for the fundraiser, she said. That's all. David studied her for a moment longer, then lifted his glass. Well, cheers to that. You look good, Lila. Really good. Then he turned and disappeared back into the crowd, the scent of his cologne lingering a little too long. Lila stood still for a moment, grounding herself again. Behind her, Mason approached, quiet, steady. Everything okay? She nodded, eyes still on the photo of the school. Yeah, just a ghost from my old life. He didn't press, just reached out and rested his hand gently on her back. And in that touch, there was no question, no judgment, only presence. From the speakers above, the music softened again, notes rising like breath through glass. And Lila let the past fade, just a little, in the sound. Sometimes closure isn't something you receive, it's something you walk in and decide. The ballroom shimmered under chandeliers that seemed too proud of themselves. Crystal arms stretching wide over polished floors and people dressed in fabrics that caught every bit of light. Lila entered quietly beside Mason, her hand resting in the crook of his arm, steady but light. She could feel the attention before she saw the source. Eyes flicked their way, not loudly, but noticeably. Names whispered like questions. A few curious smiles. A few that weren't quite smiles at all. She kept her gaze ahead. Across the room, a string quartet played something elegant and hollow. Glasses clinked gently. Waiters moved like clockwork through tight spaces. The event had clearly been designed to impress. Every inch curated, from the towering floral centerpieces to the calligraphed menus placed at every table. And at the far end of it all, Noah. He stood near a circular bar, laughing at something someone said, a hand lightly resting on the back of a woman in silver. Elaine, presumably. He hadn't seen her yet. Not really. Vanessa, her college roommate, spotted her first and waved. Lila offered a small wave back but didn't change direction. Mason leaned in slightly. Want to step outside for a bit, get some air? She shook her head. Not yet. They moved through the room slowly. She was aware of the weight of her presence, not because she wanted to be noticed, but because she knew she would be. It was the kind of evening built on appearances, and tonight she was simply undeniable. Eventually, they paused near the center. Champagne was offered. She declined. Then Noah turned. Their eyes met. He faltered. Just slightly. It wasn't visible to most, but Lila noticed it in the way his jaw tightened for half a breath, how his fingers readjusted around his glass. He gave a nod. Measured. Civil. Like they'd run into each other at the grocery store. Not at the event celebrating his future without her. Elaine turned too, her expression unreadable. Lila offered a quiet smile, gracious, distant. Noah didn't approach. Neither did she. They both knew there was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said too late. Mason leaned close again. Still doing okay? She turned to him. I am, she said, and meant it. There was no tremble in her voice, no tightness in her chest, just presence. Clarity. She wasn't here to prove anything. She was here because once she thought this kind of evening, this kind of man, was the peak of what she could want. Now she saw it all for what it was. A performance. One she no longer needed to audition for. As they turned to walk toward the terrace, her dress caught the light and shimmered briefly in green and gold, like a leaf in the last hour of autumn. Seen, and already letting go. Some speeches are made for the room. Others are meant to remind someone who's listening too closely. The lights dimmed slightly as someone tapped the microphone at the front of the ballroom. Lila paused mid-step near the back of the room, a glass of still water in hand, Mason beside her. The sound of conversation softened into anticipation. Noah stood center stage, tuxedo flawless, smile rehearsed. Good evening, he began, voice warm, clear, practiced. Elaine and I are deeply grateful you're all here tonight to celebrate with us. It's not every day you find someone who makes the world feel steady, someone you can build a future with. Polite laughter, then applause. Lila didn't clap, not out of pettiness, just stillness. Her grip around the glass didn't tighten, her breath didn't catch. But inside, something shifted, like a drawer closing softly on an old photograph. Elaine joined him on stage, tall, composed, the image of refinement. She took the mic with a careful smile. We've both worked hard to get where we are, and we've learned, individually and together, that love isn't just about chemistry. It's about alignment, vision, timing. Lila almost admired the delivery. Almost. But beneath the poise, she caught it. The moment Elaine's smile stayed 1 second too long. The flicker of something behind the eyes. Tension, doubt, a message not meant for the crowd. Then it was over. More applause. Glasses raised, the music returned, a little louder than before. Lila sipped her water and let the sound of celebration pass through her. Mason touched her lower back lightly. "You want to stay longer?" he asked gently. She glanced toward the exit, then back at the dance floor. "No," she said softly. "I think I've seen everything I needed to." They made their way toward the doors, pausing once more near a table covered in party favors, gold boxes tied with white ribbons, each embossed with the couple's initials. She didn't take one. Outside, the air was cool, the city alive in its usual rhythm, buses sighing at corners, wind brushing against stone. As they walked to the car, Lila let herself look up at the sky. No stars, just soft, shifting cloud cover lit by street lamps. She thought about all the things that weren't said tonight, and how, for once, silence didn't feel like something withheld. It felt like something earned. Sometimes the people who hurt you return not to apologize, but to see if you still remember how it felt. The terrace was quieter than the ballroom, framed by potted olive trees and low glass railings overlooking the glowing grid of the city below. The breeze carried a faint chill, but Lila welcomed it. It gave her something real to feel. She stood near the edge, arms folded loosely, her dress brushing against the stone floor as she shifted her weight. Mason was inside, checking in with someone he knew. She didn't mind the moment alone. Footsteps approached. She didn't turn. Not yet. She already knew. Noah's voice came from behind, quieter than usual. "I didn't expect you to actually come." Lila let a pause settle between them before answering. "I didn't come for you." She finally turned. He stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, the wind tugging slightly at his jacket. He looked tired, like someone who'd been smiling too long. "I just thought," he said, eyes flicking toward the city lights, "after everything, maybe we could talk." She studied him. There was a time when those words would have pulled her in, when the sound of his voice, even uncertain, would have cracked something open. But now it was just a voice. "Talk about what?" she asked, tone even. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe just how things ended." Lila's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "They didn't end. You left. There's a difference." He looked down. The silence wasn't heavy, just overdue. "I wasn't ready," he said finally. "For what?" she asked. "Fatherhood? Honesty? Showing up?" His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something break. Not dramatically, just the quiet unraveling of a man who was finally hearing the words he'd spent years avoiding. "I'm sorry," he said, and it sounded like it hurt to say it. She nodded once, not in forgiveness, just acknowledgement. "I know." He stepped forward slightly, hesitant. "Do you ever wonder if things could have been different?" Lila let out a soft breath, the kind that carries more than words can hold. "Sometimes," she said, "but then I remember who I became because of it." She didn't say it with pride, just truth. Noah looked down again, then out at the skyline. "I see your name on that building every morning," he said. "I know," she replied. "So do I." Behind them, the terrace door opened. Mason stepped out, caught Noah's presence, but didn't interrupt. Lila gave Noah one last look, gentle, final. "Take care of yourself," she said. Then she walked toward Mason, the hem of her dress trailing softly behind her, like the end of a thought she no longer needed to finish. Noah stayed there, alone with the skyline and a version of her he couldn't reach anymore. Even when the truth finds its way out, it rarely arrives clean. It was just past 7 the next morning when Lila's phone rang. She was standing in her kitchen barefoot, waiting for water to boil. Outside, the city still looked half asleep, windows glowing soft and low like eyes not fully open. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something in her chest stirred. "Hello?" A pause. Then, "Lila, it's Elaine." The voice was different now, less polished, less certain. A faint tremble edged the vowels. Lila leaned against the counter, her free hand wrapping around her mug. "I know this is strange," Elaine continued, "but I need to talk. About last night, about Noah." Lila didn't respond right away. She remembered the look on Elaine's face during the speech, how her smile had stretched thin at the corners, how her eyes had flickered when Noah placed his hand a little too firmly at her back. The kind of flicker women recognize in each other, even when no one else sees. "Are you okay?" Lila asked quietly. Another pause. "I don't know." They arranged to meet at a quiet tea shop on the north side, a place with soft music and wide windows. Lila arrived first, choosing a table near the corner, back to the wall. A habit. Elaine came in a few minutes later, coat wrapped tight around her, face bare, no makeup. She sat down like she didn't want to take up space. "I'm not here to blame you," she said. I don't have many people to talk to. And last night, something cracked open." Lila nodded, letting the silence be permission. Elaine looked out the window, voice barely above the hum of the room. "He talks about you, you know. Not always directly, but it's there, like something unfinished." Lila didn't move. Elaine turned back to her. "But last night after you left, he changed, got quiet, cold, said he wasn't going to let people make him look small." Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her cup. "I asked him if he ever really let go of you. He didn't answer. And I realized I'm engaged to someone still measuring his worth by a woman he walked away from." Lila breathed in, slow and quiet. "He made me feel like I was too much," she said softly, "and not enough at the same time. It took me a long time to learn those weren't my faults. They were his needs." Elaine nodded, eyes shining but dry. "I think I knew that, but I needed to hear it." They sat in quiet after that. Two women, one truth. 1,000 unsaid things between them, but not heavy, not sharp, just real. Outside, the sun had begun to rise higher, catching the edge of a passing bus in gold. Lila looked at Elaine, not as a rival, not as a footnote, but as someone standing at the same crossroads she once did. And when Elaine finally stood to leave, she didn't say goodbye, just thank you. Lila watched her go, the bell above the door ringing gently behind her. Then she looked down at her tea, steam curling softly into the air. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive in your own story. Sometimes it shows up in someone else's. Sometimes the fallout doesn't find you, it finds the person who thought they'd outrun it. It started quietly. A message from Claire. Check the news. Lila sat at her desk, light spilling in through the studio windows, sketches laid out beside a half-drunk coffee. She clicked the link without urgency, expecting gossip, maybe a feature on the party. But there it was. Real estate executive under investigation for financial misconduct, Noah Granger at the center of ongoing inquiry. She blinked, then read it again. Accusations of forged signatures, misused funds during a past merger, possible fraud. There was a photo of him too, taken months earlier, smiling at a podium. The headline now hung above it like a verdict. Her breath caught, not in shock, not anymore, but in the strange ache of being proven right too late. The phone rang. Claire again. "Have you seen it?" Her voice urgent, breathless. "I'm looking at it now. It's everywhere. Some of the investors are backing out, and rumor has it, Elaine's the one who tipped the investigators." Lila closed her eyes for a moment, not in triumph, in sorrow, for the version of Noah who might have turned out different. For the women who still believed they could change him. For Elaine who now understood the weight of a man who loved power more than partnership. Her phone buzzed again, voicemail from an unknown number. She didn't want to play it. But she did. It was Noah. His voice cracked, frantic, bitter. "They froze my accounts. Elaine's gone. I don't know what to do. Lila, please. You know I never meant for it to go this far. You were always the only one who—" She ended the message, deleted it. The past was not her emergency anymore. She stood slowly, walked over to the window. Outside, the street pulsed with its usual rhythm. No sirens, no chaos, just people moving forward. Behind her, the computer screen still glowed with the article. She didn't need to read the rest. She'd already lived it, in her own way, in the quiet ruins he left her to rebuild. Now they were his, only his, and her name wasn't in the headline. Not once, only the building, the studio, the life she'd built brick by brick. That was the only story that mattered now. Some endings don't come with slamming doors. Just a voice that finally stops asking. It was raining again when Lila stepped into Mason's apartment later that evening. The hallway lights were dimmed, golden and low, as if the space had already decided to rest before she arrived. He was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, stirring something fragrant on the stove. She didn't speak right away. Just leaned against the doorframe watching him, her coat still damp from the walk. He glanced over his shoulder. "Hey," he said gently. "You okay?" She nodded. "Yeah, just a long day." He turned off the heat, wiped his hands on a towel, and walked over. She didn't wait. "He called," she said. Mason paused. "Noah?" She nodded again. "He left a voicemail, sounded desperate, said everything's falling apart, asked me to help." A breath passed between them. "I didn't answer," she added. "You don't owe him anything," Mason said, his voice even, steady. "I know," she whispered. "I just didn't expect the fall to sound so familiar." They sat together on the couch, the lights low, the sound of rain ticking softly against the windows. She told him everything: the investigation, the voicemail, the news, the look on Elaine's face, the parts of herself she thought were buried but surfaced anyway. Mason didn't interrupt, didn't offer solutions, just listened, the way someone does when they understand that healing isn't about fixing, it's about being there. When she finished, he reached for her hand. "I'm proud of you," he said. Not for surviving him, but for never becoming him. The room stayed quiet after that. Later, as the rain softened into mist, they moved to the dining table, where dinner waited, still warm. Mason lit a candle, more out of habit than romance, and the small flame flickered between them like a promise neither of them had to speak aloud. Lila glanced at the window. The city outside had blurred into soft streaks of light and motion. Somewhere out there, Noah was pacing, unraveling, calling numbers that no longer picked up. But here in this quiet room, she realized something else. He wasn't just gone. He was irrelevant. And that was a different kind of peace, earned, not handed. Her phone sat face down on the table. It didn't ring again. Sometimes the person who replaces you doesn't need saving. She just needs someone to tell her she's not imagining it. The call came late in the afternoon. The sun had started to dip, casting long amber streaks across the walls of Lila's studio. She was reviewing lighting plans when her phone lit up again. "Elaine." She hesitated, then answered. "Can we meet?" Elaine's voice was thinner than before. Not broken, just quieter. Lila didn't ask questions, only offered a time and a place. They met at a bookstore cafe near the park. Neutral ground, quiet shelves, soft chairs. A few college students hunched over laptops, the scent of roasted beans and old paper drifting through the air. Elaine arrived wrapped in a long wool coat, her hair pulled back, face bare. There was no ring on her finger. She sat across from Lila without ordering anything. "I ended it," she said. Lila said nothing. Just let the words settle into the space between them. Elaine's hands were folded tightly on her lap. "I wanted it to work," she continued. "I told myself we were good together, that I could handle his ambition, his moods, that the way he talked about you, like a story with no ending, didn't mean anything." She paused, swallowed. But it did. Lila listened, unmoving. Elaine looked at her, eyes rimmed in something close to fear. "Tell me I'm not crazy. Tell me you saw it too. The way he bends the truth, makes you feel like you're the unstable one, then acts like the victim when you flinch." Lila's throat tightened, not from pain but memory. She remembered the conversations that turned into cross-examinations, the moments she questioned herself more than him, the way he made her explain emotions like they were weaknesses instead of warnings. "You're not crazy," she said. "He makes you doubt so you won't leave." Elaine let out a breath that shook a little on the way out. "I kept trying to be enough," she whispered. "For him, for his world, for that version of the life I thought I wanted." Lila nodded slowly. "We all do. Until we stop." They sat in silence for a while, the kind that wasn't awkward, just necessary. Elaine finally reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the ring. It was still in its box. "I don't want it, and I can't sell it, not yet. Feels like that would make it real." Lila didn't reach for it, didn't offer to take it, just let it sit between them, a relic, not of love, but of illusion. When Elaine stood to leave, she looked stronger, not because she was healed, but because she'd chosen herself, even in the middle of the storm. "Thank you," she said again. Lila smiled, soft and sad. As Elaine walked out, the door jingled gently behind her. Lila stayed for a few minutes longer, watching the sky darken through the windows. Outside, the street lamps blinked on, one by one. And on the table, the ring box sat closed, small and still. Like a chapter someone finally stopped writing. Some people don't reach out to apologize. They just want to know they still matter. The message came at 2:13 a.m. Lila woke to the faint vibration on her nightstand. The city outside her windows hushed in that rare hour between late and early. She blinked against the darkness, reached for the phone with one hand while the other remained tucked beneath the warmth of the blanket. Noah, just one line. Do you ever miss what we had? No context. No punctuation. She stared at it, screen casting soft blue light onto her face. The question didn't sting. Not anymore. It just sat there. Like dust on a shelf you stopped noticing until you touched it. Mason stirred beside her, the sound of his breath even, steady. His hand, still resting lightly against her back, never moved. Lila turned the phone face down. Did she ever miss it? Sometimes, yes, but not the way he meant. She missed the girl who believed in beginnings. The one who thought loyalty meant silence. The one who whispered dreams into someone else's absence, hoping the echo would return as commitment. But what they had, no. She didn't miss the second guessing. The waiting. The way I'm busy replaced I'm here. She laid back down, eyes tracing the faint glow of city lights dancing across the ceiling. The room felt like a promise kept, warm, still, whole. Noah's message remained unread, unopened, not as revenge, but as self-respect. Some words don't need answers. Some questions aren't really questions. They're just the sound of someone knocking on a door you've already locked and thrown away the key. Not every ending needs a goodbye. Sometimes silence finishes what words never could. A week passed, then another. No calls, no late-night messages, no sightings in the lobby of her office building, no flowers sent with apologies wrapped in white ribbon. Just silence. Lila noticed it in small ways. In the way she no longer hesitated before unlocking her phone. In the way her heart didn't quicken when an unknown number appeared. In how her shoulders stayed lowered, relaxed, in meetings, elevators, mornings. She didn't wonder where Noah was anymore. She didn't need to. The absence had shifted from something sharp to something soft, like a scar you forget is there until someone asks about it. She spent most of her days immersed in the new project, a community space downtown, open-air roof garden, recycled materials, glass that held sunlight like water. Her team was energized, clients excited. One afternoon, as she reviewed material samples in the lobby of Mercer Studio, the receptionist approached with a quiet voice. "There was someone here earlier," she said. "Didn't leave a name, just looked around for a while, said he used to know you." Lila paused for only a second. "Was he looking for me?" The receptionist shook her head. "No, he just said, tell her the place turned out even better than she imagined." Then he left. Lila nodded, the corners of her mouth lifting, not quite a smile. Just understanding. She didn't ask for a description, she already knew. Later that evening, after her team left, she walked through the building slowly, floor by floor, past the sketches framed on the walls, past the open workspaces, the quiet hum of plans becoming places. She paused in the main atrium, the first space she ever designed after Noah left. The ceilings arched like quiet wings. Natural light poured in even at dusk. She stood there a moment, her hand brushing the railing, eyes soft. No flash of memory, no pang, just breath. Outside, the city moved on. So did she. Behind her, the motion-activated lights flicked off one by one as she stepped toward the elevator. And in that soft, deliberate darkness, she felt it fully. Not grief, not regret, just release. Some stories don't end with a door closing. Just with a life that kept going. Sunday morning arrived with a soft, reluctant sun. Lila stood barefoot in her living room, a mug of coffee warming her hands, the smell of cinnamon lingering faintly from the scone she barely remembered eating. Outside, the street was quiet. Just the rustle of leaves against pavement and the occasional hum of a passing car. She wasn't rushing anywhere. No meetings, no decisions to make, no messages to return. Just the quiet hum of a life, no longer waiting for someone to choose her. Mason appeared behind her, stretching, hair still tousled from sleep. He pressed a kiss to her shoulder. Not saying anything at first, just presence. "You good?" he asked eventually. She nodded, eyes still on the window. "Yeah, I think I am." They moved through the kitchen together, making breakfast in the kind of rhythm that doesn't ask permission. She sliced fruit. He flipped pancakes. A song played low in the background, something easy, acoustic, familiar. Later, as the morning stretched into late afternoon, they walked to the park. No destination, just space. Lila paused by a small pond, watching a child toss breadcrumbs to a pair of ducks paddling in lazy circles. She smiled, not the kind that performed, but the kind that simply arrived. She thought of everything that had happened, not with anger, not even with sadness, just recognition. She had been left, yes, but she had also stayed, fought, grown. And somewhere in the quiet rebuilding, she had learned how to love again, not just someone else but herself. And now, standing here, hand tucked into Mason's, breeze pulling gently at the hem of her coat, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt still. That night back home, she left a light on in the entryway, not because she was afraid of the dark, but because she liked the way it softened the room when the rest of the house fell asleep. A quiet warmth, a steady glow. And as she turned off her phone and pulled the blanket around her shoulders, she didn't think about what could have been, only what was, and what was hers. At last. Dear friend, sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply continue, quietly, without fanfare. Like Lila, we may be left, broken, even forgotten. But as the Stoics remind us, what stands in the way becomes the way. We are not the pain we carry, we are the way we carry it. And when we choose presence over bitterness, peace over performance, we begin to rebuild. Not louder, but deeper. Not to prove anything, but because we've remembered our worth. So if you're standing in the stillness after the storm, know this: you haven't lost the story. You've just begun the chapter that's finally yours. Let your stillness be your strength. If this story moved you, consider giving it a like, sharing it with someone who needs it, and subscribing for more stories that stay with you long after the screen fades.